The morning sun painted the quiet cul-de-sac in gold as sprinklers hissed across manicured lawns. Everything in the neighborhood looked perfect: trimmed hedges, identical mailboxes, freshly washed cars, the kind of perfection only an HOA president would obsess over. And in this neighborhood, that man was Daniel Hargrove. To everyone on Willow Creek Drive, Daniel was the symbol of order. He walked the same route every morning, clipboard in hand, inspecting lawns, noting violations, and greeting residents with his practiced smile. His voice was calm, polite, but firm enough to remind everyone who was really in charge. What no one questioned, though, was the quiet woman who lived in his house, Mrs. Linda, the middle-aged housekeeper who wore the same yellow apron every day and moved silently from room to room. People barely noticed her, and when they did, they only saw what Daniel wanted them to see: a loyal employee, a quiet helper, someone who kept his big white house spotless. But behind those quiet eyes, something else lived, something unspoken. Daniel's neighbors often said he ran the HOA like a company. Rules were rules, no exceptions. He fined a family for hanging holiday lights too early. He made a widow repaint her fence because the shade of white was approved. Yet when it came to his own home, no one dared to question him. Not even Mrs. Linda. Every morning at 6 a.m. sharp, she brewed his coffee, black, 2 sugars, and left it on the kitchen counter before quietly moving to clean the porch. She never spoke unless spoken to, never sat at the dining table, and always kept her eyes low. But there were moments, rare, fleeting ones, when her gaze lingered on Daniel just a second too long. A glance filled with something like longing or regret. And when he caught her looking, he'd just clear his throat and say coldly, "Please focus on your work, Mrs. Linda." She nod, whisper, "Yes, sir," and go back to scrubbing. That morning, Daniel was preparing for the upcoming HOA inspection meeting. He wanted the neighborhood to look perfect. New mulch in the flower beds, no trash cans left outside, fences freshly painted, everything in order. He stood by his window, clipboard in hand, watching a teenager's bike leaning on a tree. He frowned. Unacceptable. From behind, Mrs. Linda spoke softly, "Would you like me to remind them, sir?" Her voice trembled slightly, like she wasn't used to speaking. Daniel nodded, not turning around. "Yes, please do." She hesitated. "You know, you could tell them yourself. They might listen better to you." He turned sharply, his expression hardening. "Mrs. Linda, do what you're told." Her eyes fell to the floor. "Yes, sir." For a moment, the silence between them was heavy, not the silence of an employer and maid, but something deeper, older, something that carried the weight of memory. Then Daniel turned back to his clipboard, dismissing her presence entirely. Later that day, at the HOA meeting, Daniel stood at the podium, addressing the small crowd of residents gathered in the community hall. His voice carried authority, practiced and precise. "Friends, our neighborhood stands out because we care about order, cleanliness, discipline. These values define Willow Creek." Applause followed, though not everyone clapped with enthusiasm. A young woman raised her hand. "Mr. Hargrove, some of us think the HOA fines are getting too strict. People are afraid to make mistakes." Daniel smiled, the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Rules aren't meant to frighten, Ms. Olson. They're meant to remind us who we are as a community." As the meeting ended, people murmured their complaints in hushed voices, but Daniel ignored them. He was used to resistance. He believed that structure kept chaos away. He never realized how ironic that was, because chaos was living quietly inside his own home. That night, as rain began to fall, Mrs. Linda finished cleaning the kitchen. She placed the dish rag down carefully, as if afraid to make noise. Then she walked to the small back room where she slept, a tiny converted pantry with a narrow bed and a single photograph tucked into her pillow. The photo was old, edges curled, colors fading. It showed a young boy, maybe 6 or 7, smiling with missing teeth, standing beside a woman holding his shoulders proudly. Her hand trembled as she traced the boy's face. Tears filled her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away as she heard footsteps in the hall. Daniel's voice called out, "Mrs. Linda, I need my shirt ironed for tomorrow's meeting." "Yes, sir," she answered quickly, hiding the photograph under her blanket. As she pressed his shirt under the dim yellow light, her mind drifted back to the day she left him at the orphanage. to the promises she made to herself and the years she spent searching, only to find that he had built a life without her. But she never imagined he'd build one so close to her, yet so far away. The next morning, something unusual happened. A new neighbor had moved in, Mrs. Avery, a retired teacher with sharp eyes and a kind smile. Unlike most residents, she liked to talk, and she noticed things others ignored. When she first saw Mrs. Linda tending the front garden, she smiled warmly. "Good morning, I'm Evelyn Avery, just moved in next door." Mrs. Linda smiled faintly. "Welcome to Willow Creek." "You've been working here long?" Evelyn asked. "A few years," she replied softly. Evelyn chuckled. "You must know everyone by now." Mrs. Linda hesitated. "I keep to myself mostly." But Evelyn noticed something in her tone, a quiet sadness she couldn't place. As they talked, Daniel stepped out the front door wearing his usual pressed suit. His face changed the moment he saw Evelyn speaking with Mrs. Linda. "Good morning, Mrs. Avery," he said quickly. "I see you've met my housekeeper." Evelyn smiled. "Yes, she's very kind." Daniel's tone hardened, though polite. "Mrs. Linda prefers to focus on her duties. If you need anything, please contact me directly." Evelyn's eyes narrowed slightly, sensing something off. Mrs. Linda lowered her gaze again. After Daniel left, Evelyn whispered, "He talks to you like you're invisible." Mrs. Linda forced a smile. "It's his way, he likes things orderly." "Orderly," Evelyn repeated softly, "or controlled?" Mrs. Linda didn't answer. That evening, Mrs. Avery couldn't shake her curiosity. As she unpacked boxes, she kept glancing through her window toward Daniel's house. She saw the silhouette of Mrs. Linda through the kitchen window, washing dishes, moving slowly, shoulders heavy with exhaustion. Something about her looked out of place, not like a housekeeper but like someone who belonged there. And later, when Daniel walked past her without a word, Mrs. Avery noticed something else, a subtle resemblance. The same dark eyes, the same narrow chin. Even the way they furrowed their brows looked identical. She murmured to herself, "That's not just a coincidence." Days turned into weeks and the neighborhood buzzed with small talk about new rules, upcoming inspections, and Daniel's latest announcement that everyone must repaint their fences. But Mrs. Avery's mind was elsewhere. She began noticing more: the way Mrs. Linda flinched when Daniel raised his voice, the way her eyes followed him like she was watching a piece of her heart from a distance. One morning, Evelyn saw something that confirmed her suspicion. Daniel left early for a board meeting. Mrs. Linda came out front, sweeping the porch when a gust of wind blew a photograph from her pocket. It landed near Evelyn's feet. Evelyn bent down to pick it up and froze. It was a picture of a little boy, a boy who looked exactly like Daniel. Mrs. Linda's face turned pale. "Please give that back." Evelyn handed it over gently. "That's your son, isn't it?" Mrs. Linda's eyes welled with tears. She opened her mouth to speak, then stopped. Her lips trembled. "It was a long time ago," she whispered. "Please don't tell anyone." Evelyn's heart ached. "He doesn't know, does he?" Mrs. Linda shook her head. "No, and he must never know." Before Evelyn could say more, Daniel's car pulled back into the driveway. Mrs. Linda quickly pocketed the photo and hurried inside, leaving Evelyn standing there, confused and deeply troubled. That night, Evelyn sat by her window again, watching the lights in Daniel's house flicker off one by one. She couldn't understand how a man could live under the same roof as his own mother and not know it, or worse, know it and pretend not to. And she couldn't shake the feeling that the truth wasn't just sad, it was dangerous. Because there was something about Daniel that didn't fit the picture of a son who'd simply been separated from his mother. There was coldness in him, a deep, almost bitter distance. Meanwhile, inside the house, Mrs. Linda lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The sound of rain tapping against the window reminded her of the night she'd last seen her son. He had been 8 years old, crying as she walked away, promising to come back when life was better. But life never got better. She'd spent years working under different names, saving what she could until she finally found him again, only to discover he'd changed his name, erased his past, and become someone unrecognizable. Still, she couldn't stay away. She applied for the job under her maiden name, hopping just to be near him, to see him smile again, to know he was safe. But what she found instead was a man who treated her like a stranger, like hired help. And every day she served him, she died a little more inside. The following morning, Daniel was unusually quiet at breakfast. He stared at his coffee, lost in thought. "Sir," Mrs. Linda asked softly, "is something wrong?" He looked up, his tone distant. "Someone left a note in my mailbox last night, no name, just questions." Her hands froze midair. "Questions?" "Yes." He slid the folded paper across the table. "It says, 'Does your housekeeper mean more to you than you admit?' What kind of nonsense is that?" Mrs. Linda's heart raced. Maybe someone's playing a prank. "Maybe," he muttered, folding the note tightly, "but I don't like people prying into my home." He stood, adjusted his jacket, and left for work. As soon as the door closed, Mrs. Linda sat down, shaking. Who could have written that? Evelyn, someone else who noticed. The walls that had kept her secret safe were starting to crack. That evening, Daniel came home later than usual. His expression was hard, his eyes sharp. "Mrs. Linda," he said sternly, "have you been talking to the neighbors?" She hesitated. "Only Mrs. Avery, she's new here." "I told you to keep to yourself." "She was just being kind," she whispered. "I don't need kindness, I need discretion." His voice rose slightly, not shouting but filled with restrained anger. "You work in my home, you represent me, and I can't afford gossip." Her eyes glistened. "I understand, sir." He turned away, but she spoke again, softly, trembling. "Daniel." He froze. Slowly he turned back to her. "What did you just call me?" Her lips parted. I meant Mr. Hargrove, I'm sorry." But the damage was done. His expression changed, confusion, then something like suspicion. "How do you know my first name?" Her voice broke. "You told me once." "No, I didn't." They stared at each other, the air between them heavy with something neither could name. Then he walked away without another word, leaving her trembling, terrified that she'd just torn open a secret she had kept for years. As the door clicked shut behind him, tears finally spilled down her cheeks. She whispered to the empty room, "I just wanted you to know, I never stopped loving you." And outside, hidden in the shadows, Evelyn Avery watched from her window, her face pale, realizing she'd stumbled into something far deeper than she ever expected. Something that could break more than just HOA rules. It could break lives. The next morning began with silence, the kind that felt deliberate, heavy, almost cold. Daniel didn't come down for breakfast at his usual time. The coffee pot remained untouched, steam fatting into nothing. Mrs. Linda stood by the counter, her hands trembling around the cup she'd poured for him, listening for footsteps that never came. When he finally appeared, his face was calm, but his eyes were not. They held questions, quiet, dangerous ones. He didn't say good morning, didn't glance at her. He simply picked up his clipboard and started checking the window blinds, the dust on the counter, the orderliness of the home, as if inspecting it would reveal what he couldn't understand. Finally he spoke. "Mrs. Linda," he said evenly, "I found something strange yesterday while cleaning the storage room. Did you move anything from my old boxes?" Her voice caught. "No, sir, I never touch your personal things." He nodded slowly. That's odd, because one of them was open, the box marked private adoption records." Her heart stopped. He looked up from his clipboard, studying her face. "You seem nervous," he said. She forced a weak smile. "I'm just tired, sir." Of course, he smiled faintly too, but it was a smile that made her blood run cold. "I'd hate to think anyone's been going through my history, it's sensitive." He turned, adjusting his tie, then added quietly, "You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" Mrs. Linda's voice broke. "No, sir, I wouldn't." "Good," he straightened up, "because I take privacy very seriously." And with that, he left for his morning inspection rounds, leaving her standing there, hands shaking, her eyes filled with silent dread. Across the street, Mrs. Avery watched through her kitchen window, unease creeping through her. She had noticed Daniel's behavior growing colder lately, his walk sharper, his gaze distant. And Mrs. Linda looked worse each day, pale, fragile, like a secret pressing on her chest. Evelyn had seen that look before, years ago, in her students who carried pain they couldn't name. She decided she couldn't stay quiet anymore. That afternoon, she baked a loaf of banana bread and walked over, telling herself it was just a friendly visit. But in her heart, she knew she was walking into something much more complicated. When Mrs. Linda opened the door, she looked startled. "Oh, Mrs. Avery, you didn't have to. It's just bread, dear, you look like you could use a friend." Mrs. Linda hesitated, glancing nervously toward the staircase. "He's not home right now." "Good," Evelyn said gently, "then we can talk." They sat at the small kitchen table, the smell of fresh bread mixing with lemon-scented cleaner. For a while, neither spoke. Then Evelyn whispered, "I've seen the way he looks at you, like you're something he doesn't understand." Mrs. Linda's eyes glistened. "He doesn't and he mustn't." "You don't have to protect him from the truth," Evelyn said softly. "You're his mother, he deserves to know." Mrs. Linda looked down at her folded hands. "He was only 8 when I left him. I had nothing. No money, no home. His father was gone and I thought I'd ruin his life if I kept him. So I left him with a chance, a family who could give him everything I couldn't." She swallowed hard, her voice breaking. "When I found him years later, he was already someone else. Successful, respected. I thought if I could just be near him, maybe that would be enough." Evelyn's heart ached. "So you became his housekeeper?" She nodded. "He didn't recognize me. I thought maybe it was better that way. But lately—" Her voice trembled. "He's starting to notice things. My voice, my eyes. He doesn't remember, but something in him does." Evelyn reached out, taking her hand gently. "You can't hide forever, Linda. Secrets rot when they're buried too long." Mrs. Linda wiped her tears. "You don't understand. If I tell him, he'll hate me. He already hates the woman who left him." Evelyn frowned. "He talks about her." "Not often, but when he does," she shivered, "it's like he's talking about a ghost he's still angry at." That evening, as the two women spoke in hushed tones, Daniel returned home earlier than expected. He paused at the door, hearing voices inside, his housekeeper's voice and another woman. He stepped quietly into the hall, his expression unreadable, listening just long enough to hear Evelyn say, "He has the right to know, Linda. He deserves the truth." The word truth hung in the air like a blade. He opened the door slowly. Both women turned pale. "Good evening," he said calmly. "I didn't realize we were hosting guests." Evelyn tried to smile. "Oh, I just came by to drop something off." Daniel's gaze flicked between them. "I appreciate the kindness, Mrs. Avery, but next time please call first. I prefer to know who's in my home." Evelyn stood, forcing her composure. "Of course, I'll be going." As she left, Daniel turned his eyes on Mrs. Linda. "What were you two talking about?" Her breath hitched. "Just neighborhood matters, sir." He stepped closer, his tone calm but dangerous. "I heard my name and the word truth. Care to explain?" She shook her head, terrified. "It's nothing, sir, please." For a long moment he stared at her, then exhaled slowly, smiling faintly again. "You've been nervous lately. Maybe you should take a few days off." Her eyes widened. "No, please, I'll be fine." "I insist," he said, turning away. "You look exhausted." Then he walked upstairs, leaving her standing there, her heart pounding, realizing that the walls around her were closing in. That night Daniel couldn't sleep. He sat in his study, staring at the old box labeled adoption records. It had been sealed for years. He promised himself never to open it again, never to look back. But something about Mrs. Linda's trembling voice, the way she'd said his name, the familiarity in her eyes, it gnawed at him. He poured himself a glass of whiskey and broke the seal. Inside were papers, photos, and one envelope he didn't remember seeing before. It was old, yellowed, addressed to him in faded handwriting. "For Daniel when he's ready." He frowned. He had never seen it. He opened it carefully and froze. Inside was a handwritten letter. The ink was smudged, but the words were clear enough to read. "My dearest Daniel, if you are reading this, it means you've grown into the man I always prayed you'd become. I never wanted to leave you. I only wanted to give you a life I couldn't. I've watched from afar, proud and broken at the same time. If one day you find me, I only ask that you forgive me. Love, Mom." Daniel's hand trembled. He read it twice, 3 times. The handwriting, the slant of the letters, it looked painfully familiar. Because he'd seen that handwriting every morning on grocery lists, on little notes she left by the sink. Mrs. Linda's handwriting. He dropped the letter, his breath quickening. The walls seemed to close in, the sound of the ticking clock deafening. "No," he whispered, "it can't be." But deep down he knew. He knew exactly what it meant. The next morning, Daniel came down with red eyes and a calmness that didn't feel real. Mrs. Linda stood at the stove, stirring oatmeal, unaware of the storm about to break. "Mrs. Linda," he said softly. She turned, surprised. "Good morning, sir." He smiled faintly. "Good morning." For a moment, silence stretched between them, then he placed something on the counter, the yellowed letter. Her spoon fell from her hand. "Where did you find that?" she whispered. "In a box you said you never opened." Her lips parted but no sound came. Daniel's eyes burned. "Is it true?" She said nothing. "Answer me," his voice cracked, not with anger but pain. "Is it true, are you her?" Tears filled her eyes. "Yes," she whispered, "I'm your mother." Daniel staggered back, his chest heaving. "All these years you lived in my house, lied to my face." "I didn't lie," she said through tears. I wanted to be near you. You had everything I couldn't give you. I didn't want to ruin that." "Ruin it," he repeated bitterly. "You think pretending to be my maid didn't ruin it?" She tried to reach for him but he stepped back. "You had no right," he said coldly, "no right to walk back into my life like this." "Please," she cried, "I never meant to hurt you, I missed you every day." His jaw tightened. "You don't get to say that." He turned away, his voice breaking. "I don't even know who you are anymore." And then he walked out, slamming the door behind him, leaving her collapsed on the kitchen floor, clutching the letter she'd once written for forgiveness that would never come. That evening, rain poured again, heavy, relentless, like the world itself was grieving. Mrs. Avery heard shouting earlier and saw Daniel drive off into the storm. Something inside told her she couldn't stay idle anymore. She rushed over, umbrella in hand, knocking on the door. When Mrs. Linda opened it, her face was pale, eyes swollen from crying. "He knows," she whispered. Evelyn's heart sank. "Oh, Linda." "He found the letter." I tried to explain, but he looked at me like I was a stranger. Evelyn hugged her tightly. "Give him time, he's in shock." Mrs. Linda shook her head. "No, I know that look, it's not confusion, it's hatred." The thunder rumbled above them as Evelyn guided her to the couch. "Listen to me, you did what you thought was right, you loved him." "But love doesn't fix what I broke," she whispered. "He'll never forgive me." Outside, headlights flashed as Daniel's car turned the corner, stopping across the street. He sat there for a long time, rain pounding on the windshield, watching the faint light glowing from his own house. Through the fogged glass he saw two silhouettes, his mother and the neighbor. He closed his eyes, tears streaming down his face. He didn't know if he wanted to forgive her, or if forgiveness was even possible. But he knew one thing for certain. Everything he believed about his past, about who he was, had just shattered. And in that silence, a new question began to form in his mind. If his mother had lied to him all these years, what else about his life wasn't true? The next morning, Willow Creek felt eerily still. The storm had passed, but the streets were soaked, leaves scattered across perfect lawns, a rare kind of mess that no one rushed to clean. For the first time in years, Mrs. Linda's window stayed dark, the curtains drawn, no smell of coffee, no sound of sweeping. Daniel stood at the top of the stairs, listening to that silence. It unnerved him. The order he built his life around, the neat routines, the structure, it was gone. He went downstairs expecting to see her quietly working in the kitchen, pretending nothing had happened. But the house was empty. The sink was dry, her apron hung neatly on its hook, folded as if she'd left it there on purpose. On the counter sat a sealed envelope. His name was written across it, in that same handwriting that haunted him now. He hesitated before opening it. "My dear Daniel, I know I've hurt you again and I cannot ask for your forgiveness twice in one lifetime. But please understand, I never meant for you to find out this way. I only wanted to see the man you became, even if it meant you never see me as your mother. I stayed because leaving once was unbearable enough. I'm going now before I cause more damage. Please don't look for me, just live your life, the one I dreamed you'd have." "Mom." His eyes blurred over the words. He folded the letter carefully, setting it down, then gripped the edge of the counter to steady himself. It was happening again. The same emptiness from childhood, the same abandonment, just dressed in older pain. He sank into a chair, his breath shallow. How could someone who claimed to love him keep leaving? By afternoon, word spread quietly around the neighborhood. Mrs. Linda had left suddenly. the HOA president's housekeeper gone without a trace. Mrs. Avery, of course, knew the truth, or at least part of it. She saw Daniel standing by his driveway that evening, staring at nothing, rain boots sinking in the puddles. When she approached him, he didn't look up. "She's gone, isn't she?" Evelyn said softly. He nodded. "You knew, didn't you?" Evelyn hesitated. "I guessed, but I didn't know how deep it went." He looked at her, eyes red but steady. "Why didn't she just tell me sooner?" "Because she was afraid of losing you," Evelyn said gently. He gave a hollow laugh. "She lost me anyway." Evelyn wanted to comfort him, but there was something in his voice, a quiet, bitter edge that told her he didn't want comfort. Not yet. "She thought she was protecting you," Evelyn continued. "She believed you were happier not knowing." Daniel turned away. "Then she never really knew me." He walked back toward the house without another word, leaving Evelyn watching from the curb, her heart heavy with the realization that both mother and son were broken in the same way, too proud to admit they needed each other. That night, Daniel sat in his study again, surrounded by paperwork he wasn't reading. He stared at the same adoption papers, the same letter, the same memories he couldn't escape. He wanted to be angry, but his anger kept dissolving into sadness. He wanted to hate her, but every hateful thought was followed by a memory of her voice humming quietly in the mornings, of her gentle hands setting his coffee just the way he liked it. How could the woman who raised him twice, once by blood, once in secret, be both the source of his pain and his only sense of home? He closed his eyes, whispering into the stillness, "Why did you have to be her?" Days passed. Daniel resumed his HOA duties, but something in him had changed. He found fewer people. He stopped checking lawns every morning. He even forgot the monthly meeting once, something unthinkable for the man he used to be. Residents whispered that maybe the president was burnt out. Some said it was grief over losing his housekeeper. Others said nothing, just watched him unravel quietly. Mrs. Avery, though, couldn't stay silent. She began checking on him, leaving meals by his door that he rarely touched. Then one evening, she noticed something strange, a small envelope tucked into her mailbox, no name, no stamp. Inside was a note, written in that same familiar script. "Please tell him I'm all right, but I can't come back, not yet. L." Evelyn stared at it, unsure what to do. She couldn't betray Linda's trust, but she also couldn't watch Daniel drown in guilt. Though she made a choice. The next morning, she walked over and knocked. When Daniel opened the door, he looked tired, like he hadn't slept in days. "Mrs. Avery," he said quietly, "I'm not really." "I got a message," she interrupted gently. His eyes snapped up. "From her." Evelyn nodded. "She's safe." He swallowed hard. "Where?" "She didn't say." He looked down, voice trembling. "Did she say anything else?" Evelyn hesitated, then softened her tone. "Just that she loves you and that she'll come back when you're ready." He turned away, eyes wet. "Ready for what?" "To forgive," Evelyn whispered. He didn't answer. That night, Daniel walked through his silent house, touching the spaces she once filled, the neatly arranged bookshelf, the folded laundry, the framed photo on the mantel he never knew she'd placed there. It was of him at 8 years old, the same age he was when she left. He had never noticed it before. Something inside him cracked then, not in anger but in realization. All these years he'd been chasing control, perfection, and discipline, when all he'd really been chasing was the illusion of safety. The kind a mother gives. And the woman he'd scolded, ignored, ordered around, she had quietly given it to him again without asking for anything in return. He sat down on the couch and whispered into the empty air. "I don't hate you, I just don't know how to forgive you." A week later, Daniel returned home from an HOA meeting to find a letter slipped under his door. No envelope this time, just a folded sheet of paper with trembling handwriting. "Daniel, I didn't plan to come back, but I couldn't stay away forever. I'll be at the old bus stop at sunset tomorrow. You don't have to come, but if you do, maybe we can start over. Mom." He read it twice, then a third time before pressing it to his chest. The next evening, he drove to the edge of town, to that forgotten bus stop near the hill, where the first houses of Willow Creek ended and open road began. The sun was dipping low, painting everything gold and orange. And there she was sitting on the bench, hands folded, that same yellow apron folded neatly beside her. For a long time neither spoke. Then Daniel said quietly, "You never really left, did you?" She smiled faintly, not in the ways that mattered. He looked away, tears in his eyes. "You lied to me." "I did," she said softly, "and I'll regret it for the rest of my life." He nodded slowly. "I don't know if I can forgive you." She nodded too. "I don't expect you to. I just wanted you to see me not as the woman who left or the maid who stayed, just me." He studied her for a long moment. For the first time he really saw her not as his employee, not as his mother, but as a person, flawed, scared, human. The silence between them felt like peace and grief at the same time. Finally he said quietly, "Come home." Her breath caught. "Are you sure?" He nodded. "It's still your house, always was." She began to cry, not loudly, but the kind of cry that comes from years of holding it in. He stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her, unsure if it was forgiveness or something close to it, but it was enough. The sun slipped below the trees as they stood there, mother and son, both broken, both healing, both finally seen. But somewhere in the distance, a figure stood watching, Mrs. Avery, smiling faintly, whispering to herself. Sometimes truth doesn't destroy families, it rebuilds them. And as the wind rustled through the empty streets of Willow Creek, it carried away the last echo of the secret that had haunted that perfect neighborhood for years. Or so they thought. Because the next morning, when Daniel opened the mailbox, he found one more envelope, this one in unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was a single line. "You think you know who your real mother is." Daniel froze, his blood turning cold. The handwriting wasn't hers. And suddenly he realized the mystery wasn't over. Daniel sat at the edge of his bed, the last envelope trembling in his hands. The ink was jagged, hurried, unlike Mrs. Linda's familiar, careful script. He read the line again. "You think you know who your real mother is." A chill ran through him. He didn't know whether to be afraid or angry. He thought he had faced the truth, that he had seen the depth of betrayal and love from the woman who had raised him twice, once by blood, once by proximity. But this was something else entirely. He grabbed his coat and left the house without a word, heading to the only person who might help him understand, Mrs. Avery. Evelyn opened the door to find him standing there, eyes wide, hands shaking. "Daniel," she whispered, noticing the envelope, "what is it?" He dropped the letter onto her kitchen table. "Someone sent this, I don't understand. I thought I knew everything about my mother, about Linda, but now," his voice broke, "now I'm not even sure who she really is." Evelyn studied the handwriting, comparing it to the letter she had helped deliver days ago. "This isn't hers." Daniel clenched his fists. "Then who?" Evelyn's voice was quiet but firm. "Someone wants to make you question everything, someone who knows the past more than we do." Daniel's chest tightened. He ran his hands through his hair. "I've spent my life controlled by rules, by secrets. I thought finding her would fix it, but maybe the truth is worse than any lie." Evelyn put a hand on his shoulder. "Sometimes the truth isn't a single fact, it's a story, and someone else is always holding the next chapter." He stared at her. "Then I have to find out, even if it destroys everything." That evening, Daniel drove through the old part of town, the streets where he had played as a boy, where every memory was both painful and beautiful. He arrived at the bus stop, empty now, save for the faint imprint of Mrs. Linda's coat on the bench. He sat there for hours, replaying the past in his mind. The night she left him at the orphanage, the years she spent nearby yet hidden, the letters she wrote but he never read. And then from the shadows, a figure approached. Daniel tensed. It was a woman, older than he remembered, with the same dark eyes but a stranger's face framed by time and distance. "Daniel Hargrove," she said softly, "you're finally looking for answers." He rose, wary. "Who are you?" "I'm the reason your mother had to leave," she said. "I was her friend or enemy, depending on how you look at it, but you need to know the truth, all of it." The woman introduced herself as Margaret Hall, an attorney who had represented Mrs. Linda during the adoption process. Her voice was calm, but Daniel noticed the tension in her jaw, the way her fingers flexed. "I knew you were adopted," she said gently. "And I knew your mother, Linda, would someday try to find you, but there were complications, dangerous ones." Daniel frowned. Complications. Yes, Margaret said. Your father, he wasn't just absent. He had enemies. People who would have hurt both of you if they had found out you were connected. Your mother left to protect you and she stayed close without being seen. Daniel sank onto the bench, overwhelmed. So everything, she lied for my safety. Margaret nodded. And the people who sent you that last envelope, they knew your past. They've been testing you, seeing if you were ready to handle the truth. He ran his hands through his hair, a storm of emotions raging inside him. Anger, relief, confusion. Why didn't she ever tell me? He asked. Margaret's eyes softened. Because she knew it would break you, Daniel. Sometimes love isn't enough to erase danger. She stayed hidden, even as she served you in the house you now call home. Back at his house, Daniel sat silently, letters and envelopes spread across the kitchen table. He could finally piece the story together. Mrs. Linda had left him to protect him. She had returned not as a mother openly, but as a housekeeper, silently guiding his life while keeping him safe. She had loved him from a distance, sacrificing her presence for his security. And now, at last, the danger was gone, but the scars remained. When he heard the front door open, his heart stopped. Daniel! He turned to see her, Mrs. Linda, standing in the doorway, the yellow apron in her hands, her eyes filled with tears. I didn't know if you'd come back, she whispered. He took a deep breath. I had to understand the whole story first. She nodded. I only stayed to protect you, to be near you without risking your life. He walked toward her slowly. You could have trusted me at least once. Her tears fell freely. I was afraid I'd lose you forever if I showed you who I really was. He reached out, taking her hand. You never lost me, not really. That evening, Daniel and Mrs. Linda sat together, speaking softly, the weight of years pressing down but slowly lifting with every word. They talked about childhood, about lost years, about the emptiness that had haunted them both. And for the first time, Daniel allowed himself to forgive, not because he had to, but because he wanted to heal. Outside, the streets of Willow Creek were quiet. The houses stood tall and perfect as if nothing had ever disturbed them. But inside one house, truth and love were quietly reclaiming what had been broken for decades. The next morning, Daniel walked through the neighborhood with a different perspective. The rules mattered less, the fines. The inspections, trivial compared to the real lesson he had learned. Family, forgiveness, and understanding were more powerful than any law or order he had ever enforced. Mrs. Linda worked beside him in the garden, her hands in the soil. She laughed quietly at something he said, a small, genuine laugh. For the first time in years, he felt whole. But Daniel also knew life had layers, hidden motives, secrets, dangers that could resurface. Yet now he faced them with someone who had always loved him, someone whose presence was no longer a secret. In the quiet of Willow Creek, in that perfect neighborhood, Daniel realized the real order, the real safety had nothing to do with HOA rules. It was here in the fragile, beautiful truth of human hearts. He smiled at her. I don't know what the future holds. She smiled back, placing her hand over his. Neither do I, but we'll face it together. And in that moment, the past, with all its mistakes, its lies, and its long-hidden love, finally gave way to a fragile but enduring hope. The mystery of the housekeeper who was his mother was no longer a secret. It was a story of sacrifice, resilience, and the quiet courage it takes to love someone deeply, even from the shadows. As the sun set over the manicured lawns of Willow Creek, the light caught on the house, golden and warm. Inside, a mother and son sat together, not perfect, not fully healed, but finally at peace. The letters, the lies, the years of absence, they didn't disappear, but they were no longer chains. They were reminders of love, of survival, of what it truly means to be family. And for Daniel Hargrove, the man who once ran his neighborhood like a kingdom of rules and control, the greatest lesson he ever learned was that truth, even when delayed, can finally set you free.